Welcome to Petability. I'm your host, Cathy Symons.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston. Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Hello, my friend.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm good. You know how typically at the beginning of every show, we say we're so excited about the guests that we have?
Yes, I know. Yes.
Well, today, our special guest is none other than my co-host, Cathy Symons.
The crowd goes wild.
Yes. No, I thought it was really cool because, Cathy, you reminded me about your expertise in bird rehab. And how could I have forgotten that? And we haven't had that many shows dedicated to birds, although we did interview Avian veterinarian, Dr. Marjorie McMillan, a while back. But it's time that we focused on rehabilitation and bring more folks to our flock.
Oh, nice. I like how you got that in there. That was brilliant. I think, we post a lot of pictures on Instagram of our patients and us taking care of patients. And one of the patients I always post is my friend Ozzy, who is an Amazon, a yellow nape Amazon. And people have so many questions about what I'm doing with Ozzy and how Ozzy is doing and how do I perform rehabilitation with Ozzy. So I thought, let's talk about it. Because rehabilitation isn't just for dogs or cats, right? And in our profession, in our arena, you and I have seen rabbits, guinea pigs, birds, ducks, chickens, and the pig, and our good friend, Penelope,
and the goat, Jerry,
Jerry. So really, anybody can benefit from rehab, right? It's
Absolutely.
about increasing. Yeah, it's about function, and increasing function. That's not just limited to our dogs and cats.
That was one thing that I learned because you helped me get my start as a small animal rehabilitationist. And when I came to the practice where you were working, they had a large avian population of patients. And so from the periphery, I got to observe a little bit, but I have never been involved in the rehabilitation of a bird. But I remember a couple of years ago when we were on our RV trip and that poor seagull got caught in the fishing line. The guy just cast it out innocently from a pier and just got the fishing line around this bird and reeled it in. And of course, I'm run over to the rescue. And I just remember it was the greatest compliment because when I showed you the video, because I had my partner video the whole scene, knowing that we had this podcast and so forth. And you said that my bird handling skills were excellent.
They were on point. You did everything that you were supposed to do to make that a safe rescue for that bird. It was very nicely done.
Yes.
You did a great job.
And it went flying off. It seemed to be just fine. So yes,
thank yous, just yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I was very proud of myself. Very proud of myself.
You did a good job.
So, Cathy, can you tell our audience a little bit more about how you got specifically, involved and interested in bird rehab? What does your background entail? And, how did you become such an expert? Because it's certainly a unique area. You have your niche.
It's a niche.
You are the go-to person in New England. Yes.
Right. Well, first of all, let me clarify that when I say I do bird rehab, I don't do wild bird rehabilitation. And that is largely for legal reasons. If you're going to rehab a wild bird, you should be sent to a wildlife rehabilitator. And I agree with that. Those are the people that know what they're doing. So when I say I'm doing rehab with birds, most of them are pet birds. So they're parrots, parakeets. It could be as small as a finch or as large as a macaw. And I've done them the whole gamut from the tiniest bird to the biggest bird. But I also see chickens and ducks and roosters and any type of waterfowl that's your pet. I've done rehab with them as well. And it's really been one of the greatest joys of my life. I love working with birds. It's, they're extremely intelligent. And I think that they don't get the credit that they deserve for their intelligence level. And, we're in some of these birds, especially in your African grays and your Amazon parrots, their intelligence level is has been compared to maybe a child of 5 or 6. So if you know a child that's 5 or 6, you know how smart they are.
Smart aleck.
All right, they can get on the internet, extremely intelligent. And you really have to understand them to work with. It's a completely different language than working with dogs and cats. But that being said, again, they still deserve the same kind of medical treatments and therapies that will relieve them of any type of pain or help them recover from injury.
Well, and the fact that they live so long too, not only are they smart, but I know it's different from bird, what is it, breed or species?
Bird species. So your parakeets probably, if everything goes well with it and it's a healthy parakeet, you might get 8 years, maybe 10 if you're lucky. But when you get up into things, bigger birds like the Amazons and the macaws and the African grays, you could be looking at 70, 80, 90 years of commitment to this pet bird.
And not only commitment, but thinking from a physical rehabilitation point of view, I mean, that's a long time to stay physically healthy. So I would think that just like, you're saying every species, dogs, cats, and others need physical rehabilitation, that these, because they live so long, would have a need over time for some sort of physical rehabilitation.
Right.
They're more exposure, more time to be, exposed to injury, to have an accident, but also just the things that typically go along with aging, like arthritis. And I'm hoping that you touch on that.
It's a big problem for these birds that get osteoarthritis. But let me tell you just a little bit about how I got started with birds and what gives me the
street
cred to talk about birds. I started my career at the Angel Animal Medical Center probably back in 1986, and I had the great pleasure of working with two pioneers in avian medicine. One of them was Dr. Midge Petrak, and Dr. Petrak is the author of Diseases of Cage and Aviary Birds. And that book came out in like 1969 or 1970.
Oh my gosh.
So she is the person who laid the tracks. She was a trailblazer in avian medicine. And then I also worked with Dr. Marge McMillan, who is a board certified veterinary radiologist, and she has authored many textbooks to establish a radiology as a primary diagnostic tool in avian medicine. So she teaches, she writes, and she has been a pioneer again in avian medicine. And she also was a person who was involved or instrumental in writing the board exam for veterinarians to become boarded in avian medicine. Wow. So I've worked a lot with birds, and I've felt over the years that maybe even sometimes birds might be even a little bit easier sometimes for me than dogs or cats. And so I had that background, and then I went with Dr. McMillan when she opened up the Windhover Veterinary Center, Walpole, Massachusetts. It was primarily at that time an avian practice, and maybe at that time might have been the only one in New England. I'm not certain for that, but it was certainly one of the first.
Well, and then it was also one of the first to establish physical rehabilitation.
Right.
So that makes sense that since you had a ready-made population of birds there in that practice, and they also saw many other dogs, cats, the typical, that when you started doing rehab and got certified, you were one of the first to be certified in the world in canine rehabilitation, that you would extrapolate and apply that knowledge and skill set, that unique skill set, to the birds.
And they benefit from the same things that our dogs and cats do, from massage and range of motions and exercises. And we'll talk all about that, but they benefit from that as well.
Well, let's just get into that, because I would have no idea how you would go about massaging a bird with feathers.
When I talk about massage, things that I most often massage for birds are feet, legs, or the area of the shoulder. It sort of depends on the bird and the size of the bird and what's going on. And you have to be very careful when you're handling birds, because their breathing system is a bellows system. So they need to be able to expand their chest to breathe. So you have to be very cautious about how much pressure you put on the bird, around the body, around the wings, and when you're holding them. So I don't often do a lot of real body work, just because I want to be safe with the bird and not hold them tightly. But most often what I find is, birds that are senior or geriatric or getting up there in age, Osteoarthritis is a big problem for them. And typically it's feet, ankles, knees or hips and shoulders. And so I'll massage them, and then I'll move into doing some range of motion. I don't always recommend that people do that at home themselves because it can be tricky, it can be tricky to hold these birds and make sure that you're doing them safely.
Cathy, can I ask a question here? You said, that with arthritis and maybe other injuries that they have maybe some stiffness, and then you need to do range of motion. So you can, in those little bird feet, you can detect, like, is there crepitus? Are there normals that once you've handled enough birds, how it should feel? I mean, is this where the real expertise comes in?
And we've talked about this before with our dog patients, that we've seen so many dog patients that when we do our measurements, our range of motion measures, we can almost in our head almost know exactly what that measurement is going to be, because we feel so many of them, and we're like, oh, this is normal, but this isn't normal. It's the same thing with birds. They should be able to extend their ankle. If it's locked, you can't extend it, then we're talking about some osteoarthritic process. And typically what we'll find is radiographically, we'll see it, that there's changes in those joints.
So is the radiographic evidence similar to mammals in that there's fibrosis, calcification, changes in
osteophytes,
joint surface, loss of cartilage? Do they have, with hyaline cartilage on the ends and just lots of little ones?
If you feel enough bird feet, I guess I love everybody's feet, don't I?
I guess you do. You're not, yes.
If you feel if you feel enough bird legs, ankles, feet, and shoulders and elbows, then you know what a normal, or you get a sense for what is a normal range of motion. And for birds, if they don't have that normal range of motion in their shoulder or their wing or their elbow or their feet, they can become clumsy. They can fall. When they fall, they can break open their breastbone. They break open their keel bone. It becomes difficult for them to ambulate. And then if you think about the bird in its daily life, they stand all day, and then they lock up their feet and legs at night to stand. They'll sort of hunker down a little bit, but they're still standing. Like birds, they don't lie down. And maybe if you have a snuggly bird, they might sort of like lay down on their breastbone against your breastbone, but they don't lay down on their side. They're always in a standing position.
So they are on their perch. They're not like in a little bed sling bottom of the cage.
Yes, some birds you'll see get in little hidey things. But most are standing and sleeping on their perch. They'll find a spot in their cage that they like as their sleeping spot, and they'll stick with that. Typically, they'll stay in that spot for the night. Some little birds do like those little hidey things or little fleece things, but again, they're not laying down. They're still upright.
See, I'm revealing my lack of expertise here with my line of questioning. So
it's a good line of questioning.
Well, you're welcome, you other novice bird people out there. When it comes to the arthritis, again, is it similar in that most of the time it will be bilateral unless they've had an injury, or do you typically see one side versus the other? And do birds compensate just like any other animal?
Absolutely, especially if you have osteoarthritis from an injury. So I think that the leg injury in birds is one of the most difficult things, because they do get the same sort of things that other animals get when they switch that weight bearing over to the other leg. And then that leg can become tired, overused.
And unlike our dogs and cats, that they have 3 other legs, the bird only has 1 other leg.
Only 1 other leg to lean on.
So if it's due to aging, is it typically similar in both legs then? Because changes have occurred?
Yeah, when I see aging birds, I see it osteoarthritis bilaterally. I had a patient that I loved dearly. She was a little dove. She lived to be an enormously old dove. I cannot remember how old she was, but she was an old dove. And her mom took such good care of her, but she had arthritis in just about every joint. And it was really debilitating for her. So we did, laser. We used the Luma. We used the Medcovet Luma with her.
Nice.
And that helped.
We have a show on that.
We had to modify her environment so that she could be comfortable with smaller perches and ledges versus larger square perches, and made ledges with little soft cushions on them. So they can make sort of some of the same accommodations that we make for dogs and cats, we can do for the birds as well. When I think about rehabilitating birds, I look at their environment and how can I modify their environment to make either their recovery from an injury better, or if they have something progressive like an osteoarthritic process, how can I make their environment better? How can I make it more easy for them, more livable for them. So I look at their environment, and that's one of three things I wanted to touch on today. So I want to talk about modifying their environment and how we can do that. I'd also like to touch on later in the podcast, we'll talk about exercises, and we'll talk about environmental enrichment as well. So some of the things I think about when I'm modifying a bird's environment is, where are the perches? Does this bird have good balance and can perch up high, or do they fall? Are they clumsy? So if they are, what I'll do is lower the perches. So we've got the perches closer to the bottom of the cage. If they fall, they're closer to the bottom and they're less likely to injure themselves. I also want to move the food and water dishes a little bit closer, maybe a little closer to where they can reach them, so they don't have to climb excessively to reach them. I want to make sure that they have access to their fresh fruits and vegetables, their pellets, and their water. Now, the other thing we can do for the little birds is they actually make padded platforms. So for birds that have osteoarthritis in their feet and maybe can't grasp very well, they do make padded platforms for these birds. And for the bigger birds, you can actually use moleskin on their perches to make the perches a little bit softer for their feet. We never want to use those perches that have sandpaper on them. Those just lead to sore feet. Can you imagine standing on sandpaper all day? It really doesn't do anything to keep their nails trimmed. I think it's actually quite uncomfortable. And when in regards to perches, we can get square size perches. So if your bird is having trouble grasping the round dowel, you can actually get these, actually they're rectangular shaped perches. We can also get those. They may be easier for that bird to hold on to. And as far as the bird goes, I would make sure that the bird toenails are also trim. And I know we talk about this all the time about dogs and their toenails, but birds need to have their toenails trimmed too. And there's reasons for that. One, if their toenails are too long, they get caught in things. They can get caught on rope toys. They can get caught. But conversely, we don't want them to be too short either, because it's part of their grasping mechanism. So there's a little bit of a sweet spot, and that's where your avian veterinarian is going to come in. We want to make sure that toenails are not too long, but also not too short.
Right. That, again, didn't even think about that. So whether they're, out and about, but particularly in their cage where they go because they need restful sleep, just like other animals, right? And that's typically where they go for the night to sleep. So you can make changes to their environment to make their lives more comfortable.
Exactly.
So do you also do stretching with birds? Because I know, again, in our mammal friends, we do massage, range of motion, and then the next thing to follow is typically stretching.
Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the ways I think that is a tell for owners about whether their animal or whether their bird has some type of osteoarthritic process or pain is the stretching, because birds will typically stretch periodically all throughout the day. And
what's that look like?
Well, it's the cutest thing. Typically, they'll do one wing and one foot on the same side. They'll stretch the leg and they'll stretch the wing on the same side.
So just extending them kind of out?
Usually down.
Okay.
Yeah, usually down, and then they'll stretch their leg, and then they'll bring it back and they'll bring their wing in, and then they go to the other side and stretch that as well.
Okay.
And if you start to notice that your birds, because it's a very natural thing for birds to do, is to stretch. And if they're not stretching, then that's something we should talk to the veterinarian about, especially if they're only stretching on one side, or they're not stretching the leg on the other side. And you're like, that's weird. And if they're not stretching, then that could be an indication that they're having some type of problem. Now, stretching in birds, you have to be very careful, of course. You do not want to overstretch. You have to be very careful. Little birds like canaries, parakeets, finches, their legs can break very easily. You don't want to put a lot of force on that. It's a very gentle stretch at the end of your passive range of motion. And you really have to listen. This is definitely a listening thing. If that bird is like, can't pull this leg out, you're not going to force it to come out, because you could injure that bird. Be very careful.
In your efforts to act as a surrogate stretcher and help them along, it seems like that would be highly terrifying and anxiety producing. I mean, again, Cathy, this is just speaking to your experience and, level of expertise. I think you're shedding light on so many things that most of us have never thought about, unless you are a bird owner, then you get it. But
you're right. It can be anxiety producing, but certainly once you sort of understand the language of birds and how to handle them properly, and make sure that, you don't injure them, it becomes sort of second nature. I draw blood from birds. I put catheters in birds. I do rehab on birds. And it's all for me, something I've done many, many times. But for somebody who's just starting, you got to remember that you really need to learn how to handle birds appropriately, because that's the first thing. If you squeeze them, you could kill them by wrapping them too tightly or grabbing them tightly with gloved hands. I don't usually use gloves. I usually use a towel because I like to have that tactile sensation rather versus the gloves. I feel like it's a little bulky and I can't quite feel,
Be as nuanced.
how tight I'm grabbing those birds and listen. And actually, I think this is a good time to plug. I'm now just taking the certified fear-free course in Avian. They have an Avian class now, and I just started that one. So if people have birds or you're working with birds, I would get on that certified fear-free class.
Cool. Yeah. And we interviewed the education person for Fear Free
Lori.
as well, Lori.
Yeah,
and we learned so much. So check out that podcast as well. Everything comes full circle. It all makes great sense. So, here I'm imagining like a bird that's in pain and may not want to be approached by a stranger. And, you come for the first visit or what have you. And I would think that maybe they start flapping and, because they're scared and whatever. So I would think that handling piece would be really challenging. And then how do you go from that initial meeting, when you talk about how smart they are, and when they're smart, I think anything that's smart is harder to work with.
Right.
And, so then how do you gain their trust such that you can impart these therapies that you've mentioned? Because you have to go slow. You have to be careful. They have to be relaxed. That just seems almost impossible.
You're right. And if we think about birds if these birds were in the wild, they're prey animals. And so I approach them like I do with any other prey animal, like guinea pigs or rabbits or birds. I move very slowly. A lot of these birds who have come to the clinic are used to being toweled, so they're anticipating being picked up with the towel. So I give them their space. And if the bird will step up on my hand, I'll do that first.
So again, talking about fear-free, that's kind of asking their consent. If they're willing to get up onto your hand as a perch or what have you, and then you can extract them from their cage, then they're like, okay, yes, I'm ready.
Some birds will step up. They've been taught to step up. If they don't want to step up on my hand, I'll offer them a perch and see if they want to step up on the perch. And then I can get them from there to the scale, weigh them. And then oftentimes what I'll do is I'll dim the light a little bit so that I have a little bit of an advantage into getting them. And I'll kind of get myself maybe a little bit closer to the wall a little bit. And then I'll just towel them very gently. But with small birds like parakeets, it's very difficult because they're so tiny. And so oftentimes with the little birds, I'll just go right in and sort of try to grab them with the towel from inside their cage. But again, I sort of dim the light a little bit just to give myself a little bit of an advantage. Now, a lot of birds have been toweled many, many times because they go to the vet. And once they're in the towel, they do okay. They don't like it. And so I try to do whatever I'm doing to the best of my ability to make it not so scary maybe, or
less anxiety
or done as quickly as I can to get it over with. I've actually taught many classes on basic avian radiology techniques on how to x-ray birds without hurting them, or if you have to or putting them under anesthesia or x-raying them and making sure that you don't hurt them. So I've taught veterinarians how to take x-rays on birds and handle them appropriately because they can be delicate and you can hurt them and you can break them.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the positioning, for an x-ray.
Right.
So, you're talking about the little birds. So how often has a bird escaped its cage and you can't catch it? Does that happen?
Well, I've always caught it.
Because you're in a treatment room or whatever at the clinic or, but I know you go to birds' homes as well. And I would think they would be able to fly wherever. And
I usually have a system with the owners where I ask them to either keep their bird in a place where I can get them or take them out of their cages so I don't have to go in and take them out from that. And so usually when I get to their house, they're already out on either their bird perch or there's somewhere where I can access them without scaring them, frightening them, having them fly off. And they know who I am and they know what I'm going to do. Some of them take the offensive, some of them take the defense, some of them take offense, but it can be done, and again, I was at my friend Ozzy's house today and, he heard me coming because I was rolling my laser down the road, which is my fault because his dad said he heard you coming. Oh, it was a rookie move. And he was having a good day. So he was being extra spicy, and so I just have to take all those things into consideration about his emotions and what his life looks like. and that how scary it might be that somebody just came into your house and picked you up with a towel. And so I try to minimize my time that I hold him. And then I move into some exercises that will be maybe entertaining for him versus me holding him, because I'll do my laser treatment, my massage, my stretching. And then we'll actually move into some active exercises. And then food is involved. And when food is involved, that can be a lot more fun for him.
So what does that look like? And I can imagine, I mean, you say food is involved, but don't birds like Ozzy have like an enormous amount of beak strength, like hundreds of pounds per square inch? So
yes,
how do you give him a piece of food without getting your finger?
You have to be careful. Oh, there's all kinds of things you can do. I mean, I can hand birds string beans, a strawberry, a blueberry. But if it's something of interest to them, then often typically take it, or they'll take it from the owner. If they won't take it from me, they'll typically take it from their owner. It's a very trusting relationship between owners and their birds.
I want to get back to that for a second, but like if you're holding a blueberry, blueberry isn't very big. But are you telling me then that the bird is careful, like they're dexterous with their beak, and they will just be able to get that blueberry and not touch your finger?
Right. Oh, yeah. Unless they want to bite me, then I'm in trouble. But yes, they can. They're very dexterous with that beak. They can grab whatever they want out of their food dish too. They can grab that one blueberry at the bottom of the dish with their beaks. They can grab whatever they want. They know what they want and they know how to get it. And the beak is hard, but it's dexterous, and their tongue is also like an appendage. It's very smooth. It doesn't have like a saliva like a dog or cat would have. It's a very smooth, almost leathery surface. It's almost like using a finger. And so they're very dexterous with that.
Interesting.
And sometimes they want to trick you. They're like, I'll take the blueberry, but I'm going to try and bite your finger.
No.
Your finger also, but string beans. You can hand them string beans.
Sure.
One of the most popular, I think, treats out there is the Lefever's Nutriberries. Birds love Nutriberries. They love them. And sometimes I can get compliance with using something like that. You can't always. It's not like a dog. You can't always bribe the bird. I think that it's very difficult for the bird to 100% trust me in any case at all.
Well,
they're very trusting of their owner, but I don't think I can ever gain full trust like I do with some of my dog patients. They'll take it and drop it. They won't.
Yeah. They're a little bit more discerning.
Right.
You've mentioned now several times about like they trust their owner and how you engage their owner and you partner with the owner.
Yep.
So do most birds bond with one person in their household? And, I know that we try to do that with our mammal friends too, to enlist their help, but it sounds like it's more imperative with the birds than it may be for a dog or a cat to have the owner's assistance.
Yeah. And with some of the smaller birds, I'll go to people's homes and they'll have little aviaries, and these budgies will have like a clutch. They're like a little group of budgies, and they that's how they live in colonies, and that's how they breed. They're colony breeders. And so to get the parakeets, of course, I'm not going to have much trouble at all. I'm just going to reach my hand in with a little washcloth probably and pick the parakeet out that I want. Some parakeets are very bonded to their owners, but oftentimes you'll see them living with multiple parakeets. When you get into the larger birds, unless you have an aviary, you don't really see people having, 10 African grays. It's like one or two maybe.
Right.
And those relationships become very intense between the owners and their parrots. And I think that before they reach the age of sexual maturity, you might have a baby bird come in to your home who's bonded and plays with everybody and is happy and joyful and, will submit to all kinds of, things, play and so forth. But once they hit sexual maturity, sometimes that changes. And then they often pick one person in the house that is their person. And then you might see that bird now who liked, the husband, now only likes the wife and is trying to bite the husband. So you might get some changes in behavior as the bird gets older. And those relationships, like I said, the relationship between people and their bird. I mean, if you think about we talked about this with the rabbit, to be able to have a relationship with an animal that is a prey animal whose whole instinct is to run, flee, get away,
fly away,
right? And to gain the trust of an animal like that's a really special bond. That's a very special relationship. And then so oftentimes that bird then only likes that one person in the house. And so sometimes as these birds age, it can become problematic because they get aggressive with other people in the house because they've chosen this one person as their mate, as their person,
this makes perfect sense because we have some friends that I met through their dog, and they have I don't know, it's a little-ish bird named Tupper, and Tupper will only respond and be friendly with Debbie. The other person in the household, I mean, cannot be left in the room with Tupper or she will get attacked. So, and I was like, what? And so, yeah, now this is all making sense. But it's also kind of sad for them because Jackie is now deprived of this relationship and they have to make, concessions and plan things around when Tupper's going to be out of the cage and all of that. But so I guess that's something else that people need to be aware of when they're thinking about getting a bird.
Yeah. And I think that with these larger birds, I think it becomes increasingly difficult for us to recreate their environment. I think with some of the smaller birds, we're doing okay with the parakeets and the finches and the canaries, I think, because they can live in colonies. And, but when you get to a big bird like that, I think that it's difficult to recreate their environment that makes them be birds, right? It's hard. And we have fantastic bird owners as clients. They're fantastic, like hardcore bird people. And still, even then, it's hard to give that bird emotionally everything that it needs.
Yeah, all the enrichment and stimulation and so forth. Yeah. I do want to talk about that, but before we move on, can you describe some specific exercises that you might do with a bird?
Again, therapy exercises are really going to depend on the bird's diagnosis. But I'm also going to take into consideration the bird's size and whether or not the bird is flighted. I don't want them to fly off. But let me give you a few examples of some exercises I might incorporate into a bird's therapy plan. So for example, for large birds, I will often use an exercise that I call step up, the step up exercise. Large birds are often taught to or trained to step up on their owner's hand or perch with the command step up. I'll use that to my advantage if that's the case. And I'll have the birds step up on a perch, and then I'll present them with another perch just a little bit higher than that one and ask them to step up again. So then I'll repeat that, almost like they're climbing a ladder. And if the bird is comfortable and they've mastered this exercise, I'll often have them sit on the perch and maybe tip the perch up a little bit or tip the perch down a little bit, almost like a balance board that you would use, with your dog patients. And these exercises are good for strengthening of the legs, grasping with the feet and balance. And for smaller birds, I'll incorporate a ladder into their cage and into their environment and encourage them to climb by maybe enticing them with a little bit of millet spray, hanging somewhere that will entice them to climb up that ladder to get it. I would stay away from rope ladders because the birds like to pick at that rope. And that leaves little threads on the rope, and those threads can actually get wrapped around their toes, their feet, or possibly even their tongue. And then the other thing I'll do is sometimes I'll try different size perches too to get smaller perches to get a tighter grasp, or maybe a square perch to get a different type of grasp from the toes. And birds usually respond if they know how to step up. They usually do very well with that exercise.
So I have a question because when I was having some issues with arthritis in my hands, and I went to an occupational therapist, and they recommended using a bigger pen, that has like a larger diameter, larger circumference, so that I didn't have to bend and squeeze so tightly.
Yeah.
Does that work with the birds, or it could be smaller or bigger? You have to just analyze that specifically with each bird.
Exactly. I need to know am I rehabbing an injury to your foot, or am I doing something to your foot or your ankle or your knee because you have arthritis? The other thing that I'll do if this bird has an injury and it's not a bird that can step up, but it needs to grasp, or I want to get strength in the feet. Sometimes I'll give them differently shaped objects to hold in their feet. They like to shred things. So like a tongue depressor is fun for them to hold, because they can hold it real tight with their grasp, and then they can also shred it, which is really fun for them. And then I'll also, you can get these unfinished round wooden balls at the craft store. And so sometimes I'll have them hold that with their foot. Usually they'll end up throwing it or dropping it. But if I can get them to grasp that at different sizes, I just make sure that I don't get one that's so small that they can get it, in their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get the unfinished wood one in different sizes, so I can have them hold those. You can also have them hold different sizes of things for food, because birds can have a variety of diet in their food. So different size pastas, you can hold that. I mean, their foot is so dexterous, they could hold a uncooked piece of spaghetti if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But also you could have them hold a string bean or a strawberry. A carrot, exactly.
Okay.
And that's fun for shredding. But again, it requires them to grip and hold and use their feet in a various ways of holding. I want to say more complicated movement to hold smaller things, and then having to spread your feet out to grab the bigger things.
Right. So the larger the object, you get some stretching,
get a little bit
and different muscles engaged. And then as you work your way down, then you have to be more, like we were talking about previously, like dexterous, and it's like fine motor versus gross motor.
Exactly.
Skills.
That's what I'm trying to think of, like that fine motor skill for them. The other thing I can do, I tell the clients, if your birds like to shower, and it depends on what kind of bird you have. They don't shower every day like people, but probably once a week at least they like to shower or be sprayed or mist. And when they do that, they make all kinds of dynamic movements. Their wings come out and they flap and they splash water. And it's just a really joyous thing for them. But again, you're using all these fine motor skills. You're flapping your wings, you're bringing them out like this, and then you're tossing water with your head. And it's something that most birds enjoy. And some birds will even get into their like water dish and just like really get into it.
Like a bird bath.
And that's a lot of dynamic movement, wings, feet, head, shoulders, and they enjoy it.
And I'm thinking too, balance.
Right. Exactly. And balance.
Yeah. And weight shifting.
Exactly. And it's something in their environment that we can add that they enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
A shower or misting.
As we always try to do, like with their therapeutic exercises, not making it tedious or uncomfortable, but making it fun, engaging, joyous, as you say. Yeah.
And that's usually something an owner and the bird can do, and it's very bonding as well. It's an engaging with each other and a bonding, and birds love to have that mist or the shower or the bird bath. So that incorporates a lot of dynamic movement. Dancing is wonderful. Birds love music. They're very rhythmic. They love to move to music, particularly cockatoos. You can dance with your bird. If your bird steps up on your hand, I wouldn't start with these really crazy movements, but just start moving your hand almost like a balance, like a balancing board, side to side, moving, turning. The bird needs to balance and the bird needs to grasp, but also they're enjoying this whole environmental enrichment piece where they're getting time with you, enjoying music. But again, you have to have a lot of balance and coordination and grasping. And dancing is a little bit unpredictable. Maybe you don't know which way it's going to go, right? So
the cha-cha-cha is very different than the waltz.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that's a fun exercise for clients to do with their birds, because the birds enjoy that as well. And the other thing I do with one of my birds, well, actually with most of my birds, is I'll do a little bit of a reaching exercise. So again, if they'll step up on a perch or step up on your hand, and I hold something that they want, usually a peanut or pistachio or something, they'll lean forward and they'll tighten up that grasp as they're leaning forward to get that. So again, more grasping, more strengthening exercises.
So they're reaching with their beak, not their foot.
They're reaching with their body, usually. They'll usually lean their body into that.
Right. And then trying to get it with their beak, whatever you're having to reach for. Okay.
Yeah, and then they have to tighten up that grasp and lean their body forward. So. And then sidestepping. I'll actually do some sidestepping with birds. I'll get them on a cushion, usually like a sofa cushion. And then if I sit down next to them, they'll usually sidestep away from me, and then I'll get on the other side of the cushion.
Sounds like aversion therapy, Cathy.
Because of their aversion and hatred for me, they move to the side. Sidestepping, again, is another type of dynamic movement for them.
Love it.
And then, of course, all the environmental enrichment stuff that you can put in their cage, different size perches and toys and things like that they can climb on.
I know I've said fairly recently on an episode that, sidestepping isn't something that is common for like our dogs, right? They tend to move forward in direction. But, as I'm picturing a bird in a cage on their perch, they're constantly sidestepping. Right. So, they need to be able to do that equally, right and left. We're always talking about symmetry. Right. And Wow, Cathy, I am just amazed at the amount of creativity that is required to rehab a bird. Again, the smarter they are, the more creative you need to be.
Creative. Yeah, exactly. And I had a bird many, many years ago and submitted this case for people to look at with other rehabbers, right? Where a bird had fractured his shoulder and his wings were off. So one wing was tight to the body and one was drooping. And then what happened constantly with that bird is she was off balance all the time and she would fall. She kept falling off of things. And I actually came up with a little system to make these little weights for her. And to be very careful, I wouldn't recommend this. I did it under veterinary supervision.
Yes. Don't try this at home, people.
Yeah, don't try this at home. We made little weights for her. And then we did some shoulder lifts, and I would hold her in my hand and I would sort of drop my hand a little bit. And in response, she would bring her wings out like this to balance. Yeah. And she got better. She got significantly better. You had a lot of creativity, but then with gentleness.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I remember, Cathy, when you were preparing for that talk and again, the ingenuity and finding a weight that was actually light enough, that you could, they were washers and, from the hardware store, but, think of all the different sizes that those come in and, you can add 1, 2, 3, up to the desired effect. And I thought that was very genius at the time.
And then you have some of your waterfowl and your ducks, your chickens and roosters. I've had some of those. I've built mobility carts for them so that we can get them up and moving, while they're recovering from injury. So some of those, some of those bigger birds can,
Didn't you just, you've also posted about, is it Kate Middleton?
No, it's Janet Quaxon.
Oh,
Janet Quaxon. She's part of the Quaxon.
Kate Middleton is married to Will, the Prince of Wales, or whatever.
Yeah, we built her a mobility cart, and because she had a problem with her foot, and she needed to get up. And what happens with these ducks? Then they have problems with their legs or their feet, and they can only maybe even be mobile with one foot, or maybe not so great with both feet. But when they get wet like that, and they can't get out of their pond, they actually become waterlogged. They can actually drown from not being able to get themselves out of the pond and upright and dry and preen. So if you have a bad foot and you're down on your chest, you can't quite get those spots and you can really get waterlogged. It becomes very dangerous for those birds. So, getting them up on their feet and getting them to start walking again is really important.
Cathy, it's almost like we plan to mention our sponsor at this time. Heads Up Watercolors needs to invent something for waterlogged birds.
You would be surprised that it happens. It happens periodically in ducks where they have injuries that don't allow them to stand up, get dry, and preen and dry themselves appropriately. And then
never knew that was a thing.
They can get waterlogged and
drown.
They can drown.
Yeah. So our friends at Heads Up Pets Watercolors, their tagline is "Save Dogs from Drowning" because of their unique foam collar that's super lightweight and keeps the dog's nose and mouth out of the water even when they're unconscious. So
it's a genius product. And then that's always in our show notes that they can, if people want to check out the Heads Up Pets Watercolor, go to any one of our shows, click right on that link. It'll take you right to Heads Up Pets Watercolor.
Right. And use the promo code PETPOD22, PETPOD 22, all capital letters, and get your 10% discount. Sounds like we've said this a few times before.
Yeah.
That's awesome, though. Not awesome that birds need something to assist them with their flotation.
Awesome that there's a product for these dogs, right?
Well, it is. And again, I guess you just think of like these waterfowl. I absolutely, because I think that they're made to be in water, that it wouldn't even cross my mind that they could possibly drown due to being waterlogged. So that was very, very enlightening.
Yep.
So Cathy, do you want to talk any more about things that owners might notice in their birds that, how do they know when their pet is suffering from something physical that is musculoskeletal or neurologic? We haven't really talked about anything neurologic.
There are some, birds can get neurologic diseases as well. I think that, we often call this in avian medicine, sick bird syndrome. What does sick bird syndrome look like? And it's sort of just like this coverall for like, what does a bird who is in pain or what does a bird who is sick look like? And those birds are often inactive. They're often fluffed up. They're puffed up. Their eyes can be sort of closed, like you would see maybe if they were sleepy. Sometimes they'll pull one leg up and they're standing on one leg and they're trying to get warm, they're trying to, they're seeking warmth. Those are all signs that something is wrong with the bird. Usually birds are pretty active. They're pretty vocal. They're up a large portion of the day, sort of eating and preening and bathing. And if there's other birds, then they're interacting with the other birds. And then they all take a nap around the same time. And then they start their little forage again before they go to bed. So if your bird isn't doing those normal bird behaviors, then that's definitely an indication that we should contact their veterinarian and let them know. Also, droppings. Droppings are a huge indication as to how birds are feeling. You should get familiar with what your bird's droppings look like, maybe how many droppings they have during the course of the day. When birds are in the hospital, I count them. I'll count how many droppings they have. If they're watery droppings, that's a problem. If they have a lime green color to them, that's a problem. There's a lot of knowledge to be gained from what their droppings look like. But also keep in mind that sometimes you can give a bird a raspberry and then later they'll have a red poop. And then you're like, oh my God. So
they're bleeding.
Keep that in mind too. But again, it all falls into that sort of under that umbrella of sick bird syndrome. Like the droppings aren't right. They aren't having enough or they're too watery.
Yeah. So it's all in context kind of, right? Like you put a few clinical signs together maybe.
And it's largely based honestly on the relationship between the owner and the bird. The owner knows what that bird does, knows what it looks like, knows what its facial expressions are, knows what it does during the day, knows what it doesn't want, doesn't like, or what it does like. And as soon as they're not doing those things, those are indications that something is not right.
Right. And that sounds similar to other types of pets.
Right.
When people say, oh my gosh, they wouldn't take their treat today and they love their treat normally, I'm like, red flag. What's going on? And it may just be that they have a little upset stomach, but it could be something much more serious.
Right. And we shouldn't dismiss the fact that birds experience pain just like any other pet. They can absolutely experience pain. And that needs to be addressed with your veterinarian. And there are pain medications for birds, but it needs to be prescribed by your doctor. But we should keep that in mind, just like any other animal. Birds can experience pain.
So you're talking about going to the veterinarian. Are most veterinarians equipped to work with birds? And part B, if people don't have a Cathy near them, what do they do when it comes to, if they need bird rehabilitation?
Right. There are, you definitely should have an avian vet if you're going to go to the veterinarian with your bird. And you can find them on the, if you go, you can look it up on the Association of Avian Veterinarians, and it will tell you who in your area specializes in birds. And they have gone through a process. They have to sit for boards to be able to call themselves a specialist. And you can find those veterinarians on the Association of Avian Veterinarians. That's where I would go. Yeah.
You've said this several times that they're prey animals. And I know that you're doing pet birds.
Yes.
So that is true 100%, no matter the size or type of bird that you're rehabbing as a pet. They're all prey animals. Unlike
they're not
wildlife rehabilitators that are working with hawks and eagles and so forth that are definitely predators.
Prey. Yeah, those are real birds of prey. When I'm talking about parakeets and finches and even parrots, they're preyed upon by other things. And so they are responding. That's their whole genetic makeup. They're responding in that I got to get away. I got to fight for my life, or I've got to get away. In order to sort of have this joyful experience of their life with people, the emotional lives of birds. The emotional lives of birds, which I think it's hard to do sometimes. It's hard to match.
I didn't mean to mock.
No, but it's true. They have an emotional life. I like the emotional life of everybody.
I know that. I was kind of teasing you because I'm like, we talk about it every show, and certainly we're going to talk about it here.
So I'm always worried about their emotional lives. But seriously, this is where environmental enrichment piece really comes in for these birds. And one of the things that birds do that's a very natural behavior for them is foraging. A good portion of their day, if they were out in the wild, would be spent foraging. So there are things that we can do, like we can hang pieces of fruit from the top of the cage or between the cage bars, have the birds move to try and find them. You could take a nut and put it in a small paper bag and twist the ends up so the bird has to search for that and then shred the bag. That's really fun to get the nut out of that. Paper towel roll, you could put some nuts or some nutriberries in a paper towel roll and then stuff the ends with paper towels. And the bird has to pull the paper towels out of the roll or shred the roll to get the treat out. So there are lots of things that we could do that way to have them sort of encourage them to forage and to move around and explore and look for food, because that's what they would do normally. There are lots of other things that we can do for environmental enrichment. There are a lot of great bird appropriate toys on the market. We want to stay away from toys that actually have chain link on them because birds can get their feet stuck in them. Stay away from bells because birds can get that little clasp in the middle of the bell in their mouth. But there are lots of other really great bird appropriate toys on the market, food dispensing toys that are on the market for birds as well. So you can see there's lots of things for these birds to do. They love to shred anything that they can shred. A paper towel roll, a paper bag, a tongue depressor, a popsicle stick. They love to do stuff like that. So that's all part of their natural behaviors, and it's enjoyable for them. So the other thing I would, recommend is, provide some outside time in the cage for these birds in a safe environment, of course, someplace safe for them, but they don't want to be in the cage all day long. They want to have a little bit of out time. And all of this is in an effort to really support the bird's mental, physical, and emotional health.
This sounds very much like when we interviewed Doreen with the rabbits,
foraging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let them rip up stuff. So Cathy, it seems like we've covered a lot today. So I guess one final question that I wanted to ask you is, if people are interested in getting a bird, are there bird rescues? Is it okay to get a bird from a pet store? Again, knowing the tremendous responsibility and commitment that it takes, but where do people go?
There are so many birds that are in need of adoption for so many reasons. They've outlived their owners. Maybe they've taken a liking to one owner, but they're trying to kill the husband of the other owner. They've become hormonal or they're screaming and they need to be rehomed. So one of my most favorite places in the world is a place in Virginia called Project Perry. Their website is full of information. They can lead you to all kinds of information about birds, their care, adoption. You can even sponsor some of the birds that are there at their sanctuary, and they're the real deal. I volunteer for them whenever I can. They know every bird's name. They know every bird's need. They know every bird. They know every single one of them by name.
That's cool.
And their likes and their wants and their dislikes and so forth. So that, and then the other place I would go just for information, not necessarily for adoption, but Lefebvre has an excellent website, and they make bird food and they make the nutriberries, and an excellently laid out, easy to follow website on every type of bird. And they've been around for a long time, but they have an excellent website with all kinds of information about birds and care, and their videos on environmental enrichment are fantastic. So if you want to learn more about birds, I would encourage you to go to Lefebvre's website, and we'll put that in our show notes.
Yeah, definitely be in our show notes. And, as with anything, I'm constantly learning, right? Everybody has different ideas. So even for you, pro bird owners out there, that have been doing this for decades, I think sometimes when you, just listen to somebody else, meet someone else, look online, you always get a little snippet of information that might, help you to, again, provide a little bit more enrichment for your bird that you hadn't necessarily thought of. And, when I was hearing you talk about some of these things, it seems like movement, as we always say, movement is really important for your bird, just like any other animal. And, keeping them strong, keeping them flexible, keeping their joints moving, working on their balance, all pointing to function. But while you're working on these things, make it fun, make it exciting, and that bonding time, right, with their owner while you're, doing this stuff is just fantastic. All right. So where can people find you, Cathy?
Well, if people would like to find me, I'm right here on Petability Podcast. We have a YouTube channel, same thing, Petability Podcast, or on TikTok at Petability Podcast as well. So they can find us all there. And
Instagram and Facebook.
Instagram and Facebook as well. And my final thought about birds and owning birds is, if you're thinking about getting a bird, do your homework. Do your homework, do your due diligence, do your homework.
That is an excellent final thought. Thank you very much to my esteemed guest and partner in crime, Cathy Symons CVT CCRP, and local bird expert.
Aficionado.
Yes. So fun. Thank you for your time, Cathy.
Chris.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Petability Podcast.
For more information about Cathy's books and living with blind dogs, please visit enableyourpet.com. Thank you, and please tune in next time.